another question I like to ask people is, how many people here have seen the movie Pollock?
Yep.
Yay, yay, nay, nay, yay, yay. Good. Good group? No?
No.
Okay.
But I know of them.
Okay.
I've heard of it.
It came out well over 20 years ago, and the first part of the movie, though, that I like to talk about is the outdoor scenes were filmed here. So if you do see the movie, you can say I sat underneath that tree, or on and on and on, or know that yard. The indoor scenes were actually filmed in Brooklyn. The other aspect about this movie is these two people had very difficult lives. There's no kind of getting around any of that. But I feel that the movie didn't try to diagnose them, didn't try to make any prognosis. It just showed their lives. And the painting scenes alone in the movie, I thought Ed Harris just did a fabulous job when he's painting the mural for Peggy Guggenheim, when he's doing the floor painting. I think his father actually gave him one of the biographies and basically said, here, make a movie about this man. I think you'll do a great job, plus you look like him. So I think the movie, again, just gives great background to them and to their lives.
Is it on, can you see it on TV? Or?
I think you could, I mean, last time I saw it, Southampton actually showed it in the theater at the Art Center in Southampton. And
buy it on, like,
yeah,
Amazon,
and I'm not,
find it free streaming.
yeah, I'm not up to speed with any Netflix or, I mean, I still have the thing you put a recording, I mean a DVD, yeah. So Marcia Gay Harden played Lee. She got an Academy Award for Best Actress. He was nominated for Best Actor and for Best Producer and Director. Didn't get it that year. So again, I highly recommend it. Another aspect, or as I get started here, is the ownership of this property. He died in 1956 in a terrible car wreck not far from here. They don't have it marked because it's on private property. They don't want people marking the tree and the property, on and on and on. This again was in 1956. Lee continued to live here until her death in 1984. And there's something about a legacy here, and this legacy really starts early on, particularly in regard to Jackson. 1941, one of Jackson's brothers, Sandy, wrote another brother, Charles, and this is before Jackson's the paintings actually that he's doing at this time period, he himself is calling very troubled, that he said, I'm going through some very violent times right now and I don't know the outcome. But these paintings that Sandy goes on to describe after he's described what it's like living with Jackson in the city, but at the end of this letter, again, 41 was when it was written, he writes, if Jackson can just hold on to himself, his work will be of real substance in this country. So again, this legacy was seen early on, and I'll kind of get to different points that people saw this. And Lee saw this, and also about Lee's own work too being protected. So as she lived here, she wanted to protect this property, and she got to be friends with a man who was head of the art department at Stony Brook, and they made an arrangement to where this property would be deeded to Stony Brook when she died, and that's what took place. When she passed away, this property was deeded to Stony Brook, so with your buying tickets and Stony Brook taking care of this property doesn't just go out to the Acaponic and never return. It's standing, and we're a part of it, and we're a part of this legacy that's here. It's absolutely, absolutely amazing that we can sit here and go into the studio, which nothing's been staged. The artist materials, the paint cans, they were all theirs. Same thing when we go into the studio. The furniture, and again, Lee lived here for a number of years after Jackson's death, so she added furniture, she changed the kitchen around, but everything was there. This season, the director cleaned up his old 78s, his records, and we got the turntable going, the amp going, and we had a jazz party here. It was just absolutely incredible to hear vinyl records, number one, but to hear his records. And he used to play it so loud that it was said that Lee would just be storming out of the house, that he loved jazz so much. So, you know, again, this property is extremely unique and a wonderful, wonderful, peaceful setting. story starts with Lee. Lee was born in 1908. She was born in Brooklyn. She is the first child of her family actually to be born in the United States. Her family had immigrated from the Ukraine, and she is the sixth child of 7. But Lee was one of these kids. I was like this as a kid from the very beginning, wanting to be a serious artist. She always had a pencil in her hand, a crayon in her hand. She was always drawing. She would copy illustrations out of magazines, out of newspapers, but from the get-go, wanted to be a serious artist. She goes to Washington Irving High School in the city, where she was a fine art major. From there, she went to Cooper Union to the National Academy of Design. And she ends up, again, on this very methodical approach to learning, practicing to be a serious artist. She ends up her studies with a German immigrant by the name of Hans Hofmann. Hans Hofmann was a German expressionist painter, taught so many people in this. Helen Frankenthaler studied under him. So many people studied under Hans Hofmann. In the time that Lee studies under Hans, he's teaching the grid system, or cubism. The thing that happens really throughout Lee's life is that her work was constantly changing depending on who she was studying under, who she was involved with really in many ways, and really on through with Jackson. And it really wasn't until after Jackson's death that she settled into a style called metonymy, or action painting, painting the female form, painting nature in this abstract way with these incredible brushstrokes of hers that just went moving and moving and moving in these wonderful colors that she had. She even changed her signature after Jackson's death. Before he died, she would sign off on her pieces with a little LK at the bottom, or Lee Krasner at the bottom. And after his death, with a lot of her paintings, it was just this gigantic Lee Krasner all the way across her canvases. So many things changed. Now, again, on this methodical approach to learning, practicing to be a serious artist, also her personal life revolved around other artists. You've got a changing art world happening in this country, and it's radically changing. It's going from the Ashcan school and regionalism and to this different way of painting, this abstract expression. It's like the word itself, painting abstractly expression. That itself is a new thought. Painting what's in here. It was once said it was easier to paint that tree over there than to paint what was in here, what was in here. At any rate, this beginnings of this new school, the New York School, of soon to be called Abstract Expressionism. The pupils of this New York school are coming from everywhere but New York in many ways. You've got Rothko coming from Oregon. You've got Clifford Still coming from Canada and Washington State. Motherwell coming from Black Mountain and Stanford. All these different young artists are arriving in the city, bringing with them this different way of painting. William de Kooning's gotten on a ship in Rotterdam without a ticket or a passport. He's a stowaway and gets off in Hoboken. And again, all these young artists are arriving in New York, bringing with them this very, very different way of painting. And Lee's getting to be friends with these young artists. 1939, 1940, she joined a group called American Abstract Artists. And it was made up of Gorky and Klein, Motherwell, Rothko, on and on and on. So Lee's practicing to be a serious artist by schooling and by education, and she's also, her personal relationships revolving around other artists. Jackson Pollock, on the other hand, the poor man couldn't even arrive on this planet in a halfway easy way. The umbilical cord was around his neck. It was a very, very difficult birth. He's the youngest of 5 boys. He was born in Cody, Wyoming, of all places. But there's another story about that. But at any rate, he's the youngest, like I said, of 5 boys, and his parents, Stella and Roy Pollock, it's almost like his birth. Difficulty is all about their family. A most difficult life and a most difficult childhood in many ways. The family left Cody, Wyoming when Jackson was about 2. They moved to California. By the time Jackson's in high school, the family's moved 9 times between Northern California, Southern California, Arizona. it was basically one failed adventure after another, and it was really Stella. We'll see her handiwork in the house of crochet work, quilting work. She taught my mother how to needlepoint, how to sew, how to do all these different things. She also happened to be my great aunt. And also, like I said, Stella was Jackson's mother. So that makes my mother and Jack first cousins. So at any rate, and it even, what?
You're once removed?
Yeah, however you say it, you know, second cousin, once removed, you know, and then it gets even worse. I'm also an artist, so, you know, I can't escape this place. But yeah, it is. At any rate, two major things happened to Jack throughout his life, really. One is that other men, not his father, come in at the last moment. His father died in 1933. And again, Jackson was born in 1912, to kind of give you an idea of the timeline here. And other men come into Jackson's life as mentors, just at the right moment to move him, push him, take him in a different direction. The other thing that happens throughout his life is that he'll see things. He'll get help for some of his issues, so to speak, but he'll witness things. He'll attend seminars that sit in this brain of his, only to come out here in this studio years later. The first mentor to enter his life is his oldest brother, Charles, who also, in their family, 3 of the boys, out of 5 boys, 3 of them are artists, and it gets worse. In my family, 3 of us artists, so it gets really goofy. But at any rate, Charles, the oldest, at this point is more of a commercial artist than a fine artist. And he sees that Jackson is struggling with himself, with school, with a direction. Jackson once wrote in high school that these years are supposed to be one's happiest years. And for me, they're damnable hell. And the more I think about things, the darker things get. At 15, he went to help his father on a survey crew at the Grand Canyon and starts drinking for the first time, and of course becomes a lifelong problem. And Charles sees that Jackson is struggling and thinks that if Jackson could get pushed to the arts, integrated into the arts, that this could help him get out of this world that he was in. So he'd send him magazines to read, books to read, again about this emerging art. He also told him to go to Pomona College to look at a mural there by a Mexican muralist by the name of Orozco. It's called Prometheus. And again, he's only in high school, but he goes to see this mural, and the idea that paintings don't need to be this big by that big really first goes into his thinking, the expansion of a large piece. We move on into the 30s now, the 1930, Charles has moved to New York in 26. Jackson has barely gotten through school. He's been kicked out a couple of times for bad behavior, but here he comes to live with his oldest brother in New York. Charles is barely surviving. He's living in a tenement in a village at this point and barely surviving. And along comes his youngest brother with no real urban experience, no real urban sophistication, and no real idea of what he's going to do once he gets there. And when he does get there, he follows his father's pattern in many ways. He would hitchhike, get on freight trains back to California, back and forth between New York and California. But on one trip to California, he meets another Mexican muralist by the name of Siqueiros. And there ought to be a movie about this man, an incredible life that this person led. But at any rate, they become very good friends. Siqueiros will later move to New York. Jackson will attend workshops that Siqueiros gives of pouring paints, of using aluminum paints, of using enamel paints, using all different kinds of techniques to apply the paints, atomizers, basting tubes, all these things, again, going into this brain of his, again, only to sit there to come out here years later. He finally settles into New York and he enrolls in the Art Students League, and probably the most important mentor of his life, Thomas Hart Benton, who's head of the Art Students League. He was from Kansas City, and the style of painting that he did was called regionalist or regionalism. And I tease that the regionalists, not the truth, but I tease that the regionalists had one color of paint on their palette, and it was amber. Jackson can't paint this way. The landscapes are heavy and dark, and they do brush in regard to this style of painting. Even Jackson said his paintings at this point were not very good. He wasn't a draftsman. He very seldom did any preliminary sketches to his work. He just wanted to paint and the style of painting really had difficulty with. But a wonderful friendship developed between the two of them. Really, almost a father-son relationship develops between the two of them. Go to Martha's Vineyard with his family, help babysit the kids. Years later, Rita would send him turkeys once they moved back to Kansas City, Rita would send him turkeys for the holidays. So it was a wonderful friendship. But the real gift that Benton gives Jackson is that Benton had devised a series of diagrams. As art is changing and as it's abstracting, principles were still important in learning to paint, even abstractly. And these diagrams were teaching composition, structure, balance, on and on and on. Years later, a German critic looking at large poured pieces commented that Jackson had a firm handle on composition and structure. That came from these diagrams that Benton was teaching his students, all of his students. We move on into the 30s now and the Depression. Lee's working as a model for other artists and as a waitress. Charles has got married, another brother's moved in. Sandy, they're at this point working as janitors, already on government assistance, but the federal government initiates the Works Progress Administration, the WPA, and an arm of the WPA was called FAP, the Federal Arts Project. It's amazing to think about this program in today's terms. If you were an artist, there was an easel division, the sculpture division, the mural division, and as an artist, you could apply for the program. If you got accepted, it was $23.86 a week, which in those days was a fair amount of money. A person working the counter at Saks Fifth Avenue was making about $5 or $7 a week. This was huge. This was allowing these young artists to paint. And as Lee said, it was non-discriminatory between male and female. It was allowing all kinds of people into this program, and it was putting food on the table. It was helping pay rent. William de Kooning was running extension cords from other apartments because he couldn't pay the electric bill. Everybody was dodging landlords, on and on and on. And the other thing that this money did, it was a loose group of people, this soon to be called Abstract Expressionists. They weren't really tied together with any manifesto or real true organization, but getting this money, it was like they had a single employer and they were all getting the same amount, this $23.86. It brought them tighter together as a group. Occasionally there would be protests. When people would get kicked out of the program, they would hold a protest. Lee once was arrested. 500 people got kicked out, all at one fell swoop by the federal government, and they had a protest downtown. Lee gets thrown in jail. Her cellmate is a woman by the name of Mercedes Matter, who's married to a photographer by the name of Herbert Matter, who ends up helping introduce Jackson Pollock to Peggy Guggenheim, but I'll get to that in a minute. But at any rate, again, this tight, loosely group of young artists, again, getting tighter and tighter together as a group. The other thing that's happening, in spite of the Depression, in spite of the problems of this country, shows are coming to New York. There was a show at the Museum of Navajos doing sand painting on the floor. Jackson was mesmerized by this technique. He would go down and watch them do this. Another show at the museum was black and white photography taken through a camera and a telescope of outer space. Again, this kinetic movement, all these things going into this brain of his. A man arrives in the United States from the Soviet Union by way of Poland, changes his name to John Graham, which is easier for me to say. Thank goodness he changed it to John Graham, but at any rate, he arrives in New York. Do any of you remember Joseph Campbell?
Yes.
Taught. This man is like a handsome, mysterious Joseph Campbell. He's into mysticism, spirituality, Jungian thought. He's got a collection of Mayan art, Aztec art, African art, all these things going on in this man's thinking. And he arrives in New York and he writes a short essay called Primitive Art and Picasso. Jackson sees this article, looks John Graham up, and another mentor enters his life, John Graham. John Graham will introduce him to his art collection, this mass collection of his. These masks will show up in some of Jackson's paintings. The other thing that John Graham does is he decides to put together a group show of the Americans that he's meeting and some of the Europeans that are starting to arrive again to escape the war. It's at the Macmillan Gallery. He invites Jackson to have one painting in this group show. He also invites Lee to have a painting in this group show. Lee goes through the list of artists that are in this show. She knows everybody on this show except for this character, Jackson Pollock. She goes basically over to his apartment, introduces herself, and their relationship starts. Again, Jackson has one painting in this group show. It's called Birth. The last painting he paints here prior to his death that people really know about, it's called Search. This is one of his first real public paintings, Birth. And then at this other end, you've got Search. And just the titles alone make wonderful bookends now to everything that he does in between Birth now and Search at this end. A woman arrives in the United States again to escape the war. She has been collecting European art and hate to say also, somebody asked Peggy how many husbands she had had. Her reply was mine or somebody else's. At any rate, she arrives in New York, soon to be married to the German Expressionist painter Max Ernst. And Peggy Guggenheim, as she put it, she wanted to open a gallery of her own in the city. As she put it, I want to show the future, not the past. I want it to be a laboratory for what's going on in the city. She gets told, like I said, one person, James Johnson Sweeney, Motherwell knows everybody, and this person knows that person, and she gets told about this young painter, Jackson Pollock. She goes over to the apartment. Lee and Jack are living together at this point. She invites him to be in a group show she's having, Artist Under 35. And again, he has one painting in the show. It's called Stenographic Figure. On the jury of this show is Mondrian. Mondrian sees this painting, and again, this goes back to the idea of legacy. Mondrian sees this one painting, Stenographic Figure, and announces to everybody, this is the most interesting work I've seen so far in this country. This man needs to be watched. People aren't looking at web pages here. They're looking at one painting and another painting and experiencing something very, very important. Peggy doesn't know what to make of this comment by Mondrian. She defers to her director, Putzel. Putzel tells her the same thing. She has to defer to Duchamp before she does anything. Duchamp tells her, you need to do something about this artist. They arrive at a contract, something she's never done before, $150 a month stipend. Again, this is huge. It's another lift for them. The government programs have dried up. The last job he had was working for a silkscreen company. The squeegee man gets fired from it at a silkscreen shop. But the 150 was, again, putting food on the table, paying their rents, allowing them to continue to paint. But the more important thing that she does is she commissions him to do a painting for her apartment. The only thing in this painting that she tells us, she doesn't say it needs to be pink and green or have 10 birds in it. The only thing in this commission is the size. It needs to be 8 feet by 20 feet long. In this apartment, it's been Sandy living there. At one point, Sandy lived there with his wife. They're all trying to work. It's not like somebody's going to work for 8 hours a day. They're all living in this apartment, trying to get along, on and on and on. He doesn't have room to stretch an 8 by 20 foot canvas. He breaks into through a wall, through the vacant apartment without telling the landlord to stretch this piece. He stretches it in July and it sits, and there's all kinds of stories about how long it took him to paint it. He painted it, and after a second solo show at Peggy's, she invited friends and critics over to her apartment to see this hung piece. It's simply called The Mural. It's said that this painting, the mural, jump-started abstract expressionism in this country. Clement Greenberg, a critic at the time, again seeing one painting, the mural, said that he felt that Jackson Pollock was the strongest painter of his generation. Peggy gets... And
was the style that he was painting at that point was...
This is a huge transition for him. It's like all of a sudden a lot of things are starting to come out in him. This one painting in itself was, and I'll show it to you once we go into the studio, is a huge leap for how he had been painting. It's a breakthrough painting for him in many, many ways. Not just the size, but the movement in this piece and the colors in this piece.
This was the beginning of his, like, the drip and
No,
slash.
no, but I'll get to that too.
Okay.
It's a progress. It's one moment to the next moment. With any artist, it's a constant movement forward. if you're lucky. At any rate, Peggy gets told you need to do more with this man, you're going to lose him to another gallery. They arrive at a new contract, $300 a month stipend, but in this contract, Peggy gets every painting he paints except for one per year of his choosing. She gets everything that he does except for one painting, and he agrees to this contract. And she never broke even on this $300, in the life of the contract, she never broke even on the $300 a month stipend, and the most she ever sold one of his paintings for in terms of the contract was for $1,000. So, you know, and a lot of people, you know, the balance of fair, they don't have any money. This is at least giving them $300 a month. And they, again, like I said, agreed to this contract. We go up to 45, and they came out here to visit friends during the summer. And as an artist, some people like the south of France or New Mexico, but the air, again, an artist myself, I think this is a special, wonderful, one-of-a-kind light and air that is here. And they notice this air, and they notice this light that we have here. And they start thinking about their lives. In October of 45, they get married in the city. November of 45, they buy this property for $5,000. They borrow $2,000 from Peggy. She takes her payments out of her $300 a month stipend. But at any rate, they move. And the house is basically, it's beyond a fixer-upper. This is 1945. It's the end of the war. They have one coal stove on the first floor. You can't get coal. They have no car. They have no money. Just this $300 a month stipend coming in. It's just a miracle how they continue to work and paint here. When they first get here, the barn was over here where the concrete still is, the foundation. The back porch, until they did get indoor plumbing, this little building right here with a padlock, that ought to have a little half moon on it. Until they did get indoor plumbing, the back porch was all open, where the one little window is off to the left of the back door, that was all open. But Jack's first studio here was upstairs where the two little windows are. And the changes, it's another leap forward for him. The changes in getting out to this air, getting out of the city, just as small as that room. The paintings themselves never made sense to me until I walked into that room. It's two series that he did up there. The Aquaponic series, which is the creek out here, and the Sounds in the Grass series. And one painting in the Sounds in the Grass series is called Shimmering Substance. It's one of my favorite paintings of his. It's one of his first totally abstract paintings. It doesn't have any body parts in it. It doesn't have any letters, numbers in it. The colors are glorious in this painting. He applied the paint with his fingers and with a knife. It's thick, and I tease that it's like opening up a down pillow and looking inside this, a bunch of feathers that are all different colors. It's just a gorgeous, gorgeous painting. We go up to 46, and now everything changes for this human being. The barn gets moved over there. He wanted north light, and also they didn't like the way it blocked the view of their back porch of the aquaponic. So they move it over. This is over 70 years ago. The trees are a lot smaller then. The other thing that happens is he changes galleries to Betty Parsons. Betty Parsons wants to sell this artwork. Even the gallery was different. It had white walls. Rothko was already selling there. It had good lighting, big walls, on and on and on. But in this move into this studio and changing to Betty Parsons, he declares that the easel is dead. He starts rolling his canvases out on the floor. All the things that he's been seeing, witnessing, now start to come out. As he put it, on the floor, I feel more at ease. He's not haphazardly throwing paint about. He's going after it in a very methodical way, like a dancer moving around his canvas. As he put it himself, I need to make contact with my canvas. And the minute I lose contact with my canvas, it turns into a mess. Here's an artist that is painting as abstractly as anybody, knowing the difference of when to move forward with a given piece and when to stop, when it's too much, when it's not enough. But knowing that balance, I think, is one of the hardest things to do as an abstract painter. The things that happen to him, again, at this point, are just, again, one thing after another. The other thing that happens to him is basically for the first time in his life, he quits drinking. So there's a very short period of time where he is painting these paintings, these abstract paintings. It's kind of hard to discuss drip, poured. He very seldom poured directly out of his cans. Again, it was mostly moving around his canvas about a foot off the floor with the ends of his sticks, with the ends of his brushes, again painting. If a figure started to, an image or a figure started to appear to him, he'd actually apply more paint and basically erase it. But moving forward, again, very, very abstractly. His first show at Betty Parsons, 17 paintings, basically wall to wall, floor to ceiling. The next show after that, I believe it was 26 paintings. Next show after that, 35 paintings. One show after another at Betty Parsons. As de Kooning said, he broke the ice for all of us. So, on that note, let's go into the studio and see where he painted.
Wow.
Okay?
Thank you.
Where was Betty Parsons?
Betty Parsons was 50, I think 57th and just off 5th Avenue. I think 57th.
What were they selling for in those shows?
His first show at Peggy's, very first show, $25. Most expensive was $750.
Wow.
The sunlight, be very careful. There's 2 steps and it goes kind of immediately dark. So do be careful when you walk in. And everybody stay, usually we have somebody here kind of helping out, but we're a little short-handed. But don't go into the studio yet. I've got to explain some things once you go into the waiting area. Now to go into the studio proper, you've got to put these booties on. They go over your feet. Socks are okay you can keep your socks on, but your shoes have to come off and the booties go over your feet, not over your shoes. And as you do this, I've got my book open to the mural that he did for Peggy Guggenheim. It's right over here, not this piece, but that's it right there. And again, it was 8 feet tall, 20 feet long. And again, just a giant leap forward for his work, going back to what you were talking about. There it is.
Okay.
A lot of people haven't seen this painting because it's been at the University of Iowa for years. Peggy donated it to the University of Iowa in the 50s, and that's where it stayed until the Iowa River flooded a few years ago. And I actually had a woman whose daughter was working on the restoration of this come on one of my tours a few years ago. But at any rate, it did end up in New York, and something else at the same time. We were going to have a party down there. Something else ended up in New York at the same time, COVID.
Oh my God.
And so it's been, the building got restored and it's gone back to the University of Iowa. Now as you get your booties on, you can, again, make yourselves at home, but pay attention to this baseball game that's hanging up here on the wall. It's also over here in the corner underneath Lee's cart. And again, everything here was theirs. This is all their materials. That was stenographic figure that you just turned to.
This.
Yeah.
Okay, I read he basically painted it overnight. It was due the next day.
There's all kinds of stories about it. That's what I try to steer away from stories.
Yeah.
I really do.
I mean, it's wild, like what the beginning
Is de
was.
Kooning's studio tourable out here?
It's not open to the public.
It's not.
No. I actually had people from the Chicago Art Institute that came out here to do a background on de Kooning because they were going to have a big show for him. And so it was like 15 people that I gave my talk to.
Yeah.
Get all done, we start walking over here, and the director introduced me to de Kooning's granddaughter.
Oh, wow.
So-
Wow. I mean, they were all out here.
Yeah.
It was great. What a time.
You be careful, that's my book.
Okay. And it's like
And it's out of print,
art.
but it's the best book.
Like this, so
Not really.
organized?
He was, for how he worked, he was pretty tidy.
He's pretty
Yeah,
tidy.
I'm impressed with that. Are those
Some artists, I'm very tidy when I'm painting. Some artists can be.
That's okay.
Those are pigments. They were sort of given to them during the Federal Arts Project period, and they kind of sort of never really did it, you know. But you know, as they got, you know, who knows? This could come in handy someday, some way.
Are we not allowed in there? Can we go in?
Uh-huh. Yeah, once you get your booties on, go on in. But again, pay attention to this baseball game over here. I've got a story about it. All the pictures you want.
Really?
I'm gonna get a glass of water though.
One more turn around.
Yeah.
I think he was.
Well,
later
again,
on,
he'd be working. Oops, sorry. He'd be working on multiple paintings.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
what he would do would he'd put his materials or his paint cans on those,
Yeah.
and they're on casters, so you
And
could
then
move
he's-
them around. Yeah. Did you give me a high sign that I just didn't miss?
No, I missed it myself. We're at 43.
Now in here, when he moves the barn, it was beyond primitive. You can see in the big black and white photograph in the corner over there, daylight coming through the shingles. He had no electricity in here. He had very little heat. No electricity. He had no air conditioning. And it is absolutely remarkable how much he was able to do in here in a very, very short period of time. You don't paint below 40 degrees, you shouldn't. And in the summertime, going through the humidity that we had a few weeks ago, it would be unbearable in here without any insulation. Again, daylight coming through those shingles. It would be worse than walking into your barn, you know, your garage and trying to work, just imagine. And he's working with his paint that he liked was an oil paint called Alkyd, which is a house paint that dries a little bit faster than your standard oil paint. He used Alkyd for trim work. And going back again to the concept that he, you know, a 5-year-old could paint that way, or he was flinging paint to and fro. This Alkyd paint was still slow to dry, and so as he's working and making puddles with these paints on the floor, if he was, again, haphazardly painting away, throwing paint about, you would see footprints all over this floor of him stepping in the wet paint. Again, if he was disorganized, if he didn't know one step to the next step, what all those different steps were going to be. Again, you would see, you know, nothing but footprints on this floor. Instead, you see his arm, you see his wrist movement in the flow of the paints that are on the floor. It's absolutely remarkable. Now, the thing that happens here is, again, back to this baseball game. We move up to 1953. All of his major pieces have been completed, all of them. He's actually gone back to using unprimed canvases, black paint with a paintbrush. And the last gallery he was involved with was the Sidney Janis Gallery, which was just down the hall from Betty Parsons. But that show, this black and white work, in spite of his life sort of headed in a different direction, that show was called the second best show of the city by Art News that year. And that's the tragedy of this, is that on one hand, you had the Museum of Modern Art had contacted him. They wanted 25 new paintings from him, not old pieces, not pieces that hadn't sold, but 25 new works of art. And he was going to be the opening artist in a series of shows called The Artist in Mid-Career, and Jackson Pollock was going to be the opening artist for these shows, and it didn't happen. I mean, it ended up being a retrospect of his work. So you've got Peggy in Europe promoting him. He's going to be in Documenta in Germany in 1959 with his own gallery. You have all these different things. but his personal life was going a different direction. And his brother in 1953 showed up here with these baseball games made on masonite boards. Sandy had a silkscreen company. They made these games and it didn't sell, so he had boxes and boxes of these boards. And Jackson painted on some of these boards. He did do smaller pieces. Not everything he did was gigantic. But at any rate, they also took these boards and they put them down on the second floor as new flooring on the second floor of the house. This was seen as an improvement. They bought the house in 45. They didn't have central heat in that house until 49. When money would slowly come in, they would make improvements. But it was, again, very, very slow. They didn't have a car when they first moved. They had friends show up in a pickup truck with furniture for them. On and on and on. How they got through these early years, again, is most remarkable. But at any rate, in here, they do the same thing as they did upstairs. They put these masonite boards down in here. So it's wall to wall of these masonite boards in here. And like I said, all of his major paintings have been completed at this point. He's gone back to drinking. His personal life is not going in the best direction. He dies in 1956, and Lee moves in here, and she spends the rest of her life painting in here. You can see in this big black and white picture of her, this is after the improvements have been made here, after electricity, after lighting, after the homosote's gone in, after insulation's gone in, but Lee's standing on a white floor. That's the baseball game. That's the masonite squares that she's standing on. She's not standing on this floor. And she liked the hard surface of the walls, so she would attach her canvases to the walls, and again, you can see in this lit up photographs of her working away, of again, these amazing brushstrokes of hers and the colors that she used. And again, the overspill of her work on these walls. The last miracle to take place here really is we go forward to Lee's death in 1984. Stony Brook takes over the property. They come in here, they lift this baseball game, these masonite boards up off the floor, and it's Jackson Pollock. It's what you're walking on right now. Undisturbed. It's so pure that they can tell where certain paintings were painted in here. Wow. And again, you can see his movement. You can see the action. You can see the so-called kinetic freedom that this man had in regard to his paintings. This is a statement that he made in regard to one of his paintings, and I think I just love to apply it to this floor. He once said about one of his own paintings, "A memory arrested in space." And that's what I think this floor is. And now we have to go to the house. There is time between tours, and you can come back here and spend more time in here. Half second as you guys come upstairs. Just to point something else once again, and I had this little girl, she was probably about 6 or 7, and we get up here and she goes, "Explain that baseball game thing again." And this is the baseball game that they put down in the barn right here. So even in the 1880s, your first floor was your finished wood floor, and the second floor was wall-to-wall carpet. Mm-hmm. So when they put this in, once again, it was seen as an improvement. And again, this is the baseball game. This is what the studio would have looked like with this flooring in the studio.
Why do you say baseball game?
Because the baseball game, see, this is like the little girl going, "Explain that baseball game thing again." His brother had a silkscreen company, and he printed these baseball games. It didn't sell, so he had all these boxes of masonite boards. What do? Give them to your artist brother. Maybe he can use them. And sure enough, they put them down as flooring. This was, again, seen as an improvement.
Right, but he didn't bother painting on them.
No, he did. Yes, he did. He actually painted on some of these boards. And these boards, again, he traded a couple of paintings for a Cadillac that he and Klein busted up. And a couple more paintings for the Oldsmobile that he was killed in. I've got a neighbor, I live on the North Fork, and I've got a neighbor that moved in next door to me, and he's telling me his ex-girlfriend's grandparents lived in Springs. And the Gramps was a doctor and happened to be Jackson Pollock's physician. Well, he paid his bill with a painting.
Wow.
But the next day, Grandma doesn't like the painting and gives it back to Jackson Pollock. And my neighbor's telling me the story, saying, that's the first million Grandma blew, you know. So at any rate, you know, all these stories of these different, you know, it's kind of hard to, you know, on this 20-foot painting to have that show up mysteriously, you know, in somebody's back porch or something. But at any rate, back to Han Chin. Han Chin did all the artwork and Matt will tell you more about it downstairs. This is all her work that's hanging up here, and it's also downstairs. During our season, which is the beginning of May to the end of October, we always do 2 different shows a year here. It's always somebody different. One year it was Picasso's influence on Jackson Pollock, so it had a lot of prints by, not originals by Picasso, but it was a beautiful reproduction of Guernica downstairs. But this woman was influenced by Lee Krasner, and so periodically, along with her work, you'll see a print, and that's what this is. This is an artist print by Lee Krasner. So she was influenced, Han was influenced by Lee Krasner, and she's just, and these pieces are for sale, she's just a delightful human being. She's in her 30s, and it's absolutely wonderful to have her artwork hanging here in the house. So we'll move on through here, and this was their guest room. And the crochet work, once again, that was all done by my dear Aunt Stella. She also, this family, I can't tell you, Roy and Stella, just how difficult their lives were. And that quilt Stella did out of her son's jackets. This family just had no money whatsoever. But at any rate, she made those quilts, the crochet work, the bed covers in there. This was the guest room. When they were together, the twin beds were actually in their bedroom, and the full bed was in here. This was their bedroom. This, if you see the movie again, or if you remember in the movie, this portrait of Lee was done by a boyfriend before Jack. It was done by he was from the Soviet Union. His name was Igor. But in the movie, it's a great little detail. In the movie, it's Marcia Gay Harding's profile. So watch for that if you see the movie again.
And is that Lee's profile?
That is Lee's profile. That's the original piece. But in the movie, they do a copy of that style, this sort of, this wonderful Soviet. I love this because it's just so Soviet, you know.
Very powerful.
She just said that she was extreme. She was a model for other artists during the Depression. And then one of the more important rooms of the house,
Is this the one that drove him crazy?
I'll get to that.
Okay.
I'll kind of wait for everybody to saunter in.
Come on.
Yeah, we're on. We're on.
Such
Yeah.
a good message from this house, you know. Wonderful.
Now this is, like I said, this is one of the more important rooms of the house. This was Jackson's first studio when he gets here. And the light in this room is mysterious. It can be a cloudy day and still wonderful light is in this room. And when he takes this room, somebody asked Lee where she worked, and her response was, and again, it's the end of the war, they couldn't get coal. You know, how they got through these first few years, once again, it's just amazing. But somebody asked Lee where she worked when Jack's working out of here, and her reply was wherever it was warm in that house, which didn't exist anywhere. When he gets here, this is where he worked, this is where he did the 2 series, the Aquaponics series and the Sounds in the Grass series. But just imagine getting out of the city, getting out of the noise, out of the pollution, out of the constant, and looking out these 2 windows every day versus whatever window he was looking out of. And I oftentimes say it would change any human being. But what I started to say about driving him crazy was that the barn sat out there.
Blocking the view.
Well, not even blocking the view, but the last big piece, the only really big piece that he's done is the mural for Peggy Guggenheim that he broke through the apartment just to paint. So he gets here, gets this room, and this room was seen as an improvement. the privacy, again, trying to work in that apartment of theirs, both artists, but this gave him some privacy to work. But looking at that window, looking at that barn every day, thinking, there's gotta be I am gonna turn that, I'm making this up, but it's having him think there's gotta be a way for me to work out of that shed, out of that barn some way, and I'm gonna do, I could just imagine what would be going through his brain. Somehow, some way, I don't care if I have to get the Pharaoh over here and move that barn.
Yeah, this space is not nearly big enough for his ambition.
No, yeah. But still, these two series, this the aquaponic series, and they didn't make sense to me until I entered this room. Again, this was another transition of his work. And then the final transition, of course, moving to the floor. All these different steps.
Here he was still using easel.
Easel or propping his canvases up against the wall. And like I said, this beautiful, my all-time favorite in all the big paintings but this shimmering substance painting, I just love. And it's a terrible painting to see as a reproduction. MoMA has it.
Okay.
And it's just one of those paintings that just stops you, I think. Stops me,
Shimmering substance.
It's just a beautiful, beautiful piece.
Are any of her mosaics here?
No, but there's still on South Broadway. There's the building, yeah, is still there.
That's just fabulous, huh?
Is that an Igor portrait?
Yeah, this is also by Igor.
Very cool.
I guess really you're so lucky that you were able to, not you personally, but your family and everybody that was connected, to save this place.
Well, I didn't have anything to do with that, and that was Lee. I mean, truly. I mean, it's just, again, it's remarkable. It's absolute. Not only save it, but that cup behind you with the pencils in it, that was hers. I mean, they didn't throw. I don't think they threw anything away. Just everything saved. All this furniture. When she moves into the studio and works out of the studio, she turned this into. This was her office. And until '72, she remained in charge of the Pollock-Krasner Foundation, which is different than the house. There's two different foundations. There's the house, and then there's the Pollock-Krasner Foundation.
But it's amazing, artists don't generally have that kind of
Forethought.
Yeah. So it's amazing.
No,
that
it's,
survived,
yeah.
especially with all.
Well, again, that's what I said at the beginning of my talk. This, somehow, some way, people saw, like I said, even talking about Sandy's letter to his brother, people saw a legacy here and an importance here. And it's kind of, in today's terms, mind-boggling in that they're not looking, like I joke about, they're not looking at a web page, they're looking at, a handful of paintings.
Real life.
Yeah.
Something. Well, that's the message in itself.
I wish.